The rain was coming down hard that Friday night in downtown Chicago. Tyler wiped his forehead with the back of his hand as he rushed between tables at Romano's Italian kitchen. His white shirt was already sticking to his back, and it wasn't even 8 o'clock yet. The dinner rush was in full swing, and every table in the fancy restaurant was packed with well-dressed customers. Tyler had been working at Romano's for almost 6 months now. When he first got the job, he thought he'd hit the jackpot. The restaurant was known all over the city for its expensive food and rich customers. The tips were supposed to be amazing. But after months of working double shifts just to pay his bills, Tyler was starting to feel bitter about the whole thing. Every night he watched people spend more money on a single dinner than he made in a week. They'd order bottles of wine that cost more than his rent. They'd barely look at him when he brought their food, treating him like he was invisible. Some nights, Tyler would go home and count his tips, wondering how these people could be so careless with money while he struggled to keep the lights on in his tiny apartment. His mom had been sick for months now. The medical bills kept piling up, and Tyler was doing everything he could to help pay for her treatments. He'd dropped out of college last semester because he couldn't afford both tuition and his mom's medicine. Every day felt like he was drowning in debt, while the customers at Romano's seemed to live in a completely different world. The front door chimed, and Tyler looked up from the table he was cleaning. 2 elderly people walked in, shaking the rain off their coats. The man was wearing an old brown sweater with patches on the elbows. His gray hair was a bit messy from the rain, and his shoes looked like they'd seen better days. The woman with him had silver hair pulled back in a simple bun. She carried a worn canvas bag and wore a simple blue dress that looked like it came from a thrift store. Tyler watched as the hostess Kelly greeted them with her usual bright smile. He could see her hesitate for just a moment as she took in their appearance. Romano's wasn't the kind of place where people dressed casually. Most customers came in wearing expensive suits and designer dresses. These two looked like they might have gotten lost on their way to the diner down the street. Kelly led them to a table by the window, one of the best spots in the restaurant. Tyler shook his head as he watched them sit down. The table they were at usually hosted business executives and wealthy couples celebrating anniversaries. Tonight, it was occupied by 2 people who looked like they might struggle to pay for an appetizer. Tyler had been waiting tables long enough to know that appearances usually told you everything you needed to know about a customer's wallet. These 2 didn't look like they belonged at Romano's. They probably saw the restaurant from the street and decided to come in without checking the prices first. He'd seen it happen before, and it never ended well. As Tyler finished wiping down his current table, he noticed that the elderly couple was in his section. Great, he thought to himself. He was already behind on his other tables. And now he'd have to waste time explaining menu prices to customers who probably couldn't afford to be there in the first place. He grabbed a couple of menus and walked over to their table, trying to keep the annoyance off his face. The couple was looking around the restaurant with quiet interest. The woman was admiring the paintings on the walls, while the man was reading the specials board near their table. "Good evening," Tyler said, setting the menus down with a little more force than necessary. "Welcome to Romano's." The woman, who he later learned was named Helen, looked up at him with kind eyes. "Thank you, dear. What a lovely place this is." Tyler glanced around the dining room. "Yeah, it's pretty fancy. Most people dress up a bit more when they come here." He let his eyes drift over their simple clothes, making his point clear. The man, Robert, didn't seem bothered by the comment. "We were in the neighborhood and thought we'd try something new," he said calmly. Tyler opened one of the menus and pointed to the prices. "Just so you know, our entrees start at around $45. Most of our popular dishes are in the $60 to $80 range." He spoke slowly, as if they might not understand. Helen nodded politely. "That's fine, dear. We'd like to look at the menu for a few minutes if that's okay." Tyler forced a smile. "Sure, take your time. I'll be back in a few minutes." As he walked away, he couldn't help but shake his head. They were probably in there adding up prices right now, realizing they'd made a mistake. He went to check on his other tables, where customers were spending money without a second thought. At table 6, a young couple had just ordered a $200 bottle of wine to go with their steaks. At table 10, a businessman was treating his clients to the chef's special tasting menu, which cost over $100 per person. Tyler felt the familiar sting of resentment as he served these customers with a smile. They had no idea what it was like to worry about money. They probably threw away more food in a week than Tyler could afford to buy. And now he had to deal with two elderly people who were probably counting pennies in the corner. When Tyler returned to Helen and Robert's table, they had their menus closed and were ready to order. He pulled out his notepad, expecting them to ask about the cheapest items on the menu. "We'd like to start with the seafood appetizer," Helen said. "And I'll have the salmon with the herb sauce." Tyler blinked in surprise. The seafood appetizer was $35, and the salmon was $62. "Are you sure about that?" he asked. "The salmon is one of our more expensive dishes," Robert nodded. "That sounds perfect. I'll have the ribeye steak medium rare with the roasted vegetables." The ribeye was $78. Tyler stared at them for a moment, wondering if they really understood what they were ordering. Maybe they were planning to eat and run, or maybe they had credit cards they couldn't afford to pay off. "And would you like to see our wine list?" Tyler asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. "Just water for us tonight," Helen said with a smile. "Thank you." Tyler wrote down their order, still feeling confused. Something didn't add up. These people didn't look like they could afford to spend almost $200 on dinner, but they'd ordered without hesitation. Maybe they were using their life savings for one fancy night out, or maybe they were planning something worse. As he walked to the kitchen to put in their order, Tyler decided he'd keep a close eye on them. He wasn't going to let anyone skip out on a bill on his watch, especially not when it would probably come out of his paycheck. The kitchen was busy, with cooks shouting orders and servers rushing back and forth. Tyler handed over the order slip and leaned against the wall for a moment. His feet were killing him, and he still had 4 hours left on his shift. "That table by the window," he said to his coworker Dave. "Keep an eye on them for me. Something doesn't seem right." Dave glanced over at Helen and Robert. They seemed nice enough. "What's the problem?" "Look at how they're dressed," Tyler said. "They just ordered $150 worth of food, but they look like they shop at garage sales." "I think they might be planning to dine and dash," Dave shrugged. "Maybe they're just not flashy with their money. Some rich people dress down, you know." Tyler laughed. "Trust me, rich people don't dress like that. Not when they come to a place like this." He pushed himself off the wall and grabbed a water pitcher. "I'm going to make sure they know exactly what they've gotten themselves into." Tyler walked back to Helen and Robert's table with the water pitcher, his mind already made up about how this evening would go. He'd seen enough customers try to pull fast ones at Romano's, and he wasn't going to be fooled by two elderly people who thought they could outsmart him. "Here's your water," Tyler announced, filling their glasses with more force than necessary. A few drops splashed onto the white tablecloth. He didn't apologize. Helen reached for her napkin to dab at the spill. "Thank you, dear." Tyler set the pitcher down with a loud thunk. "So I wanted to make sure you both understood the total for your order. With tax, you're looking at about $170. Robert looked up calmly. "That's fine. Plus tip, of course," Tyler added, his voice getting louder. "Most people here tip 20%. That would bring your total to over $200. A few people at nearby tables started to glance over. Tyler didn't care. If these two were planning to embarrass him by not being able to pay, he was going to make sure they understood the consequences first. Helen shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "We understand," she said quietly. "Do you?" Tyler asked, crossing his arms. "Because I have to be honest, you two don't exactly look like our usual customers. Romano's has a certain kind of clientele, if you know what I mean." The couple at the table next to them had stopped their conversation entirely and were now openly staring. Tyler could see the woman whispering something to her husband, who looked uncomfortable with the scene unfolding. "Young man," Robert said, his voice still calm but with a slight edge, "we're just here to enjoy a quiet dinner." Tyler laughed, but there was no humor in it. "A quiet dinner that costs more than most people make in a day. I'm just trying to make sure you know what you're getting into here." He leaned down closer to their table, lowering his voice, but not enough that nearby diners couldn't hear. "Look, I've been working here for months. I've seen people come in here who think they can handle the prices, and then they realize they're in over their heads. It's embarrassing for everyone involved." Helen's cheeks were starting to turn red, but she kept her composure. "We'll be fine, thank you. Will you?" Tyler straightened up and spoke louder again. "Because I have to tell you, if you can't pay your bill, it comes out of my paycheck. And I can't afford that right now. More heads were turning now. The elegant atmosphere of Romano's was being disrupted by Tyler's increasingly aggressive behavior. At a table across the room, a well-dressed woman was taking pictures with her phone, though Tyler was too focused on his targets to notice. Maybe, Tyler continued, you'd be more comfortable at the family restaurant down the street. They have a senior discount there and the portions are bigger. The atmosphere might be more suitable for you. Robert's jaw tightened slightly, but he kept his voice level. We're staying here. Tyler shrugged dramatically. Your choice. But don't say I didn't warn you. He turned to walk away, then spun back around as if he'd just thought of something. Oh, and just so you know, we don't accept personal checks here. Credit cards and cash only. That won't be a problem, Helen said, her voice barely above a whisper. Tyler studied their faces, looking for any sign that they were starting to panic. Instead, he saw something that annoyed him even more: dignity. Despite his best efforts to embarrass them, they were maintaining their composure. This only made him more determined to prove his point. When their appetizer was ready, Tyler carried it to their table with exaggerated ceremony. Here we have the seafood appetizer, he announced loudly enough for half the restaurant to hear. $35 worth of shrimp and scallops. I hope you enjoy every expensive bite. He set the plate down roughly, causing one of the scallops to slide toward the edge. Helen caught it with her fork before it could fall. It looks delicious, she said, though her voice was strained. Tyler stood there for a moment, watching them eat. You know, he said, most of our customers can afford to order appetizers and entrees without worrying about the cost. They don't need servers explaining prices to them. Robert took a bite of shrimp and looked up at Tyler. The food is very good. Please tell the chef we appreciate it. This wasn't going the way Tyler had expected. He'd been sure that by now they'd be making excuses to leave, or at least showing some sign that they were in over their heads. Instead, they were eating their expensive appetizer like they belonged there. I'll be sure to pass that along, Tyler said sarcastically. I'm sure the chef will be thrilled to know that. Customers like you appreciate his work. The pause before customers like you was deliberate and cruel. Tyler wanted to make sure everyone in earshot understood that he didn't consider Helen and Robert to be legitimate customers. A man at a nearby table cleared his throat loudly, clearly disapproving of Tyler's behavior. Tyler shot him a look that said it was none of his business, then turned back to Helen and Robert. Your entrees should be ready in about 15 minutes, he said. That'll be the salmon and the ribeye, both cooked exactly how you ordered them, regardless of whether you can actually afford them. Helen set down her fork and looked directly at Tyler for the first time since the harassment began. Why are you doing this to us? The question caught Tyler off guard. He'd expected anger or embarrassment, not this direct, quiet challenge. I'm just doing my job, he said defensively. Part of my job is making sure customers understand what they're ordering. No, Robert said, joining the conversation. Part of your job is treating customers with respect, something you seem to have forgotten. Tyler felt his face getting hot. Who were these people to lecture him about his job? Respect goes both ways, he shot back. And part of respecting a restaurant like this is being honest about whether you belong here. And you've decided we don't belong here? Helen asked. Tyler gestured at their clothes, their worn bags, their simple appearance. Look around you. Does anyone else in this restaurant look like you? It was a cruel question, designed to make them feel as out of place as possible. Tyler was proud of himself for making such a clear point. No, Robert said quietly. They don't. Tyler smiled triumphantly. Exactly. So maybe it's time to admit you made a mistake and find somewhere more appropriate. But instead of looking defeated, Robert smiled slightly. You're absolutely right. We don't look like anyone else here. The comment confused Tyler. He'd expected them to be embarrassed by the admission, not oddly confident about it. Good, Tyler said, though he wasn't sure why Robert's response bothered him. As long as we understand each other. He started to walk away again, but Helen's voice stopped him. Excuse me, she said. Could we have some more bread, please? Tyler turned back, irritated. Sure, more bread. That's another $8, by the way, just so you know. That's fine, Helen said. As Tyler walked to get the bread, he felt frustrated that his tactics weren't working. Most people would have been so embarrassed by now that they'd have left. These two were either incredibly stubborn or incredibly naive. At the bread station, Dave approached him. "Dude, what are you doing over there? People are starting to complain." Tyler looked around the restaurant and noticed that several tables were watching him with disapproving expressions. A few people were whispering and pointing. "I'm protecting the restaurant," Tyler said. "Those two are planning something, I know it." "They seem like nice old people to me," Dave said. "Maybe you should ease up a little." Tyler grabbed a basket of bread and some butter. "You'll see. When they can't pay their bill and try to make a run for it, you'll thank me for paying attention." He returned to Helen and Robert's table with the bread, slamming it down harder than necessary. $8 bread, he announced. "Enjoy." The restaurant around them had grown quieter, with more and more people paying attention to the drama unfolding at the window table. Tyler was too focused on his mission to notice that he was creating exactly the kind of scene that Romanos worked hard to avoid. But Helen and Robert continued eating their expensive meal with quiet dignity, showing no signs of the panic or embarrassment that Tyler was so determined to provoke. While Tyler continued his campaign of harassment against Helen and Robert, he had no idea that several very important people were watching every move he made. Romano's was the kind of restaurant that attracted influential customers, and tonight was no exception. At a corner table tucked away from the main dining room sat Isabella Martinez, one of Chicago's most respected food critics. She wrote for the Chicago Herald, and her reviews could make or break a restaurant's reputation. Isabella had come to Romano's to write a follow-up piece about their new seasonal menu, but instead found herself witnessing something far more newsworthy. Isabella had been dining at fine restaurants for over 20 years, and she'd seen her share of poor service. But what she was watching Tyler do to the elderly couple was beyond anything she'd experienced. She'd already filled 3 pages in her notebook, not with comments about the food, but with detailed observations of Tyler's behavior. "This is unbelievable," she whispered to herself, writing down Tyler's latest comment about the bread price. Isabella had been planning to write a positive review, but now she was documenting what might become one of the most damning restaurant reviews in the newspaper's history. She watched as Tyler slammed the breadbasket down and noticed how other diners were becoming uncomfortable. This wasn't just bad service. It was discrimination happening in real time, and Isabella was determined to make sure the world knew about it. Near the bar area, another crucial witness was taking in the entire scene. Vincent Rossi owned 3 restaurants in Chicago, including Romano's. He'd come in tonight to check on the business and have dinner with 2 potential investors who were considering backing his expansion plans. Vincent felt sick too, his stomach as he watched his employee humiliate customers in his restaurant. Everything he'd worked to build, the reputation, the atmosphere, the respect in the community, was being destroyed by one server's terrible judgment. "Is that how your staff usually treats customers?" asked one of the investors, pointing toward Tyler's table. Vincent's face went red with embarrassment. "Absolutely not. This is completely unacceptable." The second investor shook his head. "I have to say, Vincent, this doesn't look good for your brand. If this is the kind of service people can expect..." Vincent excused himself from the table and walked toward the kitchen, looking for the manager. His hands were shaking with anger and fear. He knew that word of this incident would spread quickly through Chicago's tight-knit restaurant community. By tomorrow, everyone would be talking about the discrimination at Romano's. The restaurant manager, Patricia Williams, was in the kitchen reviewing inventory when Vincent found her. She'd been getting reports from other servers about a disturbance in the dining room, but she hadn't seen it firsthand yet. "We have a serious problem," Vincent told her, his voice tight with stress. "There's a server out there who's harassing elderly customers, and it's happening in front of a full restaurant." Patricia's face went pale. "Which server?" "Tyler, the one who's been working extra shifts. He's treating 2 elderly customers like they don't belong here, and everyone can see it." Patricia immediately headed for the dining room, with Vincent close behind. When she saw what was happening at Helen and Robert's table, she felt her heart sink. Tyler was standing over them, speaking loudly enough for nearby tables to hear every word. But Patricia and Vincent weren't the only management figures watching the disaster unfold. At a table near the window sat Detective Linda Chang, off-duty and celebrating her wedding anniversary with her husband. Linda had spent 15 years working in Chicago's police department, and she'd developed a keen eye for troubling behavior. What she was seeing from Tyler reminded her of cases she'd worked involving discrimination and harassment. The way he was targeting the elderly couple, the deliberate attempts to humiliate them, the escalating aggression. It all pointed to someone who was completely out of line. "This is really bothering me," Linda told her husband. "That server is way out of line." Her husband, who worked as a social worker, nodded in agreement. "Those poor people. They're just trying to have dinner." Linda pulled out her phone and started recording Tyler's behavior. As a police officer, she'd learned to document situations that might need official attention later. She had a feeling this incident wasn't going to end quietly. At another table, Dr. Anthony Stevens was trying to enjoy dinner with his wife, but he couldn't stop watching the scene at the window table. Dr. Stevens ran the largest charity clinic in the city, and he devoted his career to helping people who were often overlooked or mistreated by society. "This is exactly the kind of discrimination we see all the time," he told his wife. "People making assumptions based on how someone looks or dresses." Dr. Stevens had seen this kind of treatment before, usually directed at his patients when they tried to access services or go to places where they felt unwelcome. Watching it happen in real time at an expensive restaurant made him furious. Meanwhile, near the back of the restaurant, a table of 4 college students was getting increasingly upset by what they were witnessing. They'd saved up for months to afford dinner at Romano's for one of their birthdays, and instead of enjoying their celebration, they were watching an elderly couple get humiliated. "Someone should do something," said one of the students. "Should we say something to him?" asked another. "I'm recording this," said a third, holding up her phone. "This is going to go viral." The 4th student was already posting about the incident on social media, describing what she was seeing in real time. Her followers began sharing the posts immediately, and within minutes, people across the city were reading about the discrimination happening at Romano's. But perhaps the most important witness to Tyler's behavior was someone he would never have expected. At a small table near the kitchen, an elderly man sat alone reading a newspaper while he ate. His name was Judge Harold Phillips, and he'd been coming to Romano's for over 10 years. Judge Phillips had presided over countless cases involving workplace discrimination and civil rights violations. He knew exactly what he was witnessing, and he was already thinking about the legal implications of Tyler's actions. The judge had seen the elderly couple when they arrived, and had thought nothing of their simple appearance. In his experience, some of the most remarkable people he'd met dressed modestly and lived quietly. He'd learned long ago not to judge anyone based on their clothes or appearance. As Tyler's harassment continued, Judge Phillips felt compelled to intervene. He'd spent his career fighting for justice and equality, and he couldn't sit quietly while 2 innocent people were being mistreated. He folded his newspaper and stood up, walking slowly toward Helen and Robert's table. His movement caught the attention of several other diners, who sensed that something significant was about to happen. Isabella Martinez looked up from her notes and saw the distinguished elderly man approaching the scene. She recognized Judge Phillips immediately and realized that Tyler's situation was about to become much more serious. Vincent, Rossi watched in horror as he realized that one of the city's most respected judges was about to get involved in the incident. This was quickly becoming the worst nightmare scenario for his restaurant. Patricia Williams hurried across the dining room, hoping to reach Tyler before the situation escalated any further. But she was too far away, and Judge Phillips was already at the table. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath as the judge approached Tyler, Helen, and Robert. Conversation stopped and all eyes turned toward the window table, where Tyler was still completely unaware of the storm that was about to break over him. Tyler was in the middle of explaining to Helen and Robert why they might want to consider splitting one entree to save money, when he noticed an elderly man standing beside their table. He turned toward the stranger with the same condescending attitude he'd been showing all evening. "Excuse me," Tyler said rudely. "This is a private conversation. Can I help you with something?" Judge Phillips looked at Tyler with calm, steady eyes that had intimidated lawyers and criminals for decades. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who was used to being heard and respected. "Young man," the judge said quietly, "I think it's time for this conversation to end." Tyler stared at Judge Phillips with confusion and growing irritation. "I'm sorry, but who are you exactly? I'm trying to serve my customers here." Judge Phillips smiled slightly, but there was no warmth in it. "Actually, you're not serving them. You're harassing them, And I think everyone in this restaurant has seen enough. Before Tyler could respond, a commotion started at another table. A well-dressed man in his 30s had stood up and was walking toward Helen and Robert's table, with a look of recognition and excitement on his face. "Dr. Thompson," the man called out. "Dr. Robert Thompson?" Tyler frowned, looking between the approaching stranger and Robert. "I think you have the wrong person," Tyler said dismissively. But the man ignored Tyler completely and addressed Robert directly. "Dr. Thompson, I can't believe it's you. You probably don't remember me, but you saved my daughter's life 3 years ago. She had that rare heart condition, and you were the only surgeon willing to take the case." Robert looked up with a gentle smile. "Of course I remember. Little Emma with the complex valve defect."
"How is she doing?"
"She's perfect," the man said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thanks to you, she's a healthy 8-year-old who loves to dance. I've been wanting to thank you properly for years." Tyler felt the blood drain from his face. He looked from the man to Robert, trying to process what he was hearing. "Wait, what?" The man turned to Tyler with a confused expression. "This is Dr. Robert Thompson. He's one of the most respected heart surgeons in Chicago. He's saved hundreds of children's lives." A murmur of recognition spread through the restaurant as other diners began to overhear the conversation. Several people pulled out their phones to look up Dr. Thompson's name, while others began to remember news stories they'd read about him. Tyler's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. But you're dressed like what?" Judge Phillips asked pointedly. "Like people who don't deserve respect?" Another diner approached the table, an elderly woman who had been sitting with her family. Helen Thompson? Oh my goodness, I thought that was you." Helen looked up with a warm smile.
"Mrs. Chen?"
"How wonderful to see you." "Helen ran the food bank where my family volunteered for years," Mrs. Chen announced to the restaurant. "She personally helped feed thousands of families during the recession. She's a saint." Tyler felt like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. The elderly couple he'd been humiliating for the past hour weren't poor people who couldn't afford to eat at Romano's. They were Dr. Robert Thompson and Helen Thompson, two of the most respected people in Chicago. "I don't understand," Tyler stammered. "You don't look like what we are?" Robert asked calmly. "We've never been interested in showing off our wealth, young man. We prefer to live simply and give back to our community." Isabella Martinez had left her corner table and was now standing close enough to hear everything. She was frantically taking notes, realizing that this story was becoming even more significant than she'd initially thought. "Dr. Thompson," she said, introducing herself. "I'm Isabella Martinez from the Chicago Herald. Would you be willing to comment on how you've been treated here tonight?" Vincent Rossi appeared at Tyler's shoulder, his face pale with panic. "Dr. Thompson, Mrs. Thompson, I am so incredibly sorry. This behavior is completely unacceptable and does not represent Romano's in any way." Tyler looked around the restaurant and realized that everyone was staring at him. The wealthy customers he'd been so eager to impress were looking at him with disgust and contempt. The couple he'd thought were beneath him were being treated with reverence and respect by everyone else in the restaurant. "I didn't know," Tyler said weakly. "They didn't tell me who they were." Judge Phillips stepped closer to Tyler. "And why should they have to? Do you only treat people with respect if you know they're famous or wealthy?" "No, I just—" Tyler's voice trailed off as he realized how terrible his behavior had been. Patricia Williams finally reached the table, out of breath from hurrying across the restaurant. "Dr. Thompson, Mrs. Thompson, please accept our deepest apologies. Tyler will be terminated immediately." "That won't be necessary," Helen said quietly. "Everyone makes mistakes." Her kindness in the face of Tyler's cruelty made several people in the restaurant gasp with admiration. Tyler felt even worse hearing her defend him after everything he'd put her through. Dr. Anthony Stevens approached the group, having left his own table. "Dr. Thompson, I run the downtown clinic. I've been following your charitable work for years. You've donated more money to help the underprivileged than anyone else in the city." More people began to gather around the table, sharing stories about how the Thompsons had helped them or their families. Tyler learned that Robert had performed free surgeries for children whose families couldn't afford medical care. Helen had organized food drives that had fed thousands of people during economic hardships. "Last year alone," said another diner, "the Thompson Foundation donated over $2 million to local charities." Tyler felt sick to his stomach. The couple he'd tried to drive away because they looked poor had actually donated more money to help people than Tyler would see in his entire lifetime. "They're also the most humble people you'll ever meet," added Mrs. Chen. "They never talk about their wealth or their accomplishments, they just quietly help people." Detective Linda Chang approached the group, showing her badge. "I've been recording what happened here tonight. This is a clear case of discrimination and harassment." Tyler's panic deepened. Not only had he humiliated himself in front of the entire restaurant, but there might be legal consequences for his actions. "The Thompson Foundation helped fund the new children's wing at Chicago General Hospital," said another voice in the crowd. "Dr. Thompson doesn't just save individual lives, he's helped save thousands of lives through his charitable work." Judge Phillips looked directly at Tyler. "Young man, you've spent the evening trying to humiliate two people who have dedicated their lives to helping others. They've shown more grace and dignity in the face of your harassment than you've shown in your entire time serving them." Tyler wanted to disappear. He looked at Helen and Robert, who were sitting calmly despite being surrounded by the growing crowd of admirers and supporters. "I'm sorry," Tyler said, his voice barely audible. I assumed." "You assumed that people who dress simply don't deserve respect," Robert said. "You assumed that wealth and worth are the same thing. You assumed that appearances tell you everything you need to know about a person." Isabella Martinez was writing furiously, capturing every word of the exchange. She knew this story would be front-page news, and she was already planning the headline, "Discrimination at Romano's, When Assumptions Meet Reality." Vincent Rossi was frantically trying to figure out how to salvage his restaurant's reputation, but he knew it was too late. Videos of the incident were already being posted on social media, and the story was spreading across the internet. "Dr. Thompson," Vincent said desperately, "please, let us make this right. Your meals are on the house, of course, and we'll do anything we can to show how sorry we are." Robert looked around at all the faces surrounding their table. "We appreciate that, but we came here for a quiet dinner. Perhaps we could have that now." The crowd began to disperse, but not before several more people approached to thank the Thompsons for their work in the community. Tyler stood frozen in place, watching as the couple he'd tried to humiliate were celebrated and honored by everyone around them. As the immediate crowd thinned out, Tyler realized that his assumptions hadn't just been wrong, they'd been completely backwards. The Thompsons weren't people who couldn't afford to eat at Romano's. They could probably buy the entire restaurant without thinking twice about it. Judge Phillips remained at the table, looking at Tyler with disappointment rather than anger. "I hope you've learned something tonight, young man. Character isn't determined by clothing or appearance. Real worth comes from how we treat others, especially those we think can't help us." Tyler nodded numbly, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake. But the worst part wasn't just that he'd been wrong about who Helen and Robert were. The worst part was that his behavior would have been just as wrong even if they had been the struggling elderly couple he'd assumed them to be. By the time Tyler arrived home that night, his phone was buzzing constantly with notifications. The story of what happened at Romano's was spreading across social media, faster than he could have imagined. Videos of his behavior toward the Thompsons had been posted to multiple platforms, and the reaction was overwhelmingly negative. His neighbor knocked on his door at midnight holding her phone. "Tyler, is this you? Everyone's sharing this video of some server being horrible to an elderly couple at a fancy restaurant." Tyler looked at the screen and saw himself telling Helen and Robert they might be more comfortable at the diner down the street. The video had been viewed over 50,000 times in just a few hours, and the comments were brutal. "People are calling for you to be fired," his neighbor said, scrolling through the responses. "They're saying this is discrimination and harassment." Tyler closed the door and leaned against it, realizing that his nightmare was just beginning. By morning, the video had been shared over 100,000 times, and local news stations were picking up the story. Isabella Martinez's article in the Chicago Herald was published online at 6 a.m. The headline read, "Dignity Denied: How Assumptions About Appearance Led to Discrimination at High-End Restaurant." The article detailed Tyler's behavior and included information about the Thompsons' extensive charitable work. The couple, who have donated millions to local charities and helped countless families in need, were subjected to harassment and humiliation based solely on their modest appearance, Isabella wrote. The incident raises serious questions about discrimination in the service industry and the dangerous assumptions we make about people based on their clothing or appearance. The article went viral immediately. News stations began calling Romano's for comment, and protesters started gathering outside the restaurant before it even opened for lunch. Vincent Rossi arrived at Romano's that morning to find reporters waiting outside and his phone ringing non-stop with cancellation calls. 3 major corporate events scheduled for the next month had been canceled, and several prominent customers were publicly announcing they would no longer dine at the restaurant. Patricia Williams met him at the door with a stack of resignation letters from other staff members who didn't want to be associated with the incident. "We've lost almost half our reservations for the next 2 weeks, she told him. "The damage is catastrophic." Meanwhile, Tyler was hiding in his apartment, afraid to leave. His name had been identified online, and people were posting negative reviews of him on every platform they could find. His phone rang constantly with calls from reporters wanting interviews and former classmates asking if the viral video was really him. His mother called him, having seen the news coverage. "Tyler, honey, what happened? The news is saying you discriminated against some elderly people." Tyler tried to explain, but every time he told the story, it sounded worse. There was no way to make his behavior seem reasonable or justified. "They were dressed like they couldn't afford the restaurant," he told his mother. "I thought they were going to skip out on the bill." "So you decided to humiliate them?" his mother asked. "Tyler, I raised you better than that. How someone dresses doesn't determine their worth as a person." By the end of the week, Tyler had been fired from Romano's and was struggling to find any restaurant willing to hire him. The story had become a national news item, used as an example of discrimination in service industries. Employment lawyers were calling it a textbook case of harassment based on appearance, but the Thompsons' response to the situation surprised everyone. In an interview with a local television station, they asked people not to focus their anger on Tyler personally. "Young people make mistakes," Helen said during the interview. "We hope this becomes a learning experience for everyone involved," Robert added. "The real issue isn't one server's poor judgment. The real issue is that this kind of discrimination happens every day to people who don't have the privilege we have. When someone judges you based on your appearance, it hurts the same whether you're wealthy or struggling." Their grace in handling the situation only made Tyler feel worse about his behavior. The couple he'd tried to humiliate were using their platform to advocate for others who faced similar treatment. 2 weeks after the incident, Tyler received an unexpected phone call. It was from Dr. Thompson's office, asking if he would be willing to meet with the doctor. Tyler was terrified, expecting to face more anger or possibly legal action. Instead, when he arrived at Dr. Thompson's office, he found a quiet, comfortable room where Robert was waiting with a cup of coffee. "Sit down, Tyler," Robert said. "I wanted to talk to you about what happened." Tyler sat down nervously, prepared for the worst. "Dr. Thompson, I'm so sorry about everything. I know there's no excuse for how I treated you and your wife." Robert nodded. "You're right. There isn't an excuse, but I'm more interested in what you learned from the experience." Tyler thought carefully before answering. "I learned that I can't judge people based on how they look. I learned that everyone deserves respect regardless of whether I think they can help me or not." "And?" Robert prompted. "And I learned that my assumptions about people are usually wrong. I thought you couldn't afford to eat at Romano's, but even if that had been true, it wouldn't have given me the right to treat you badly." Robert smiled slightly. "That's exactly right. The issue wasn't whether we could afford the restaurant. The issue was that you thought it was acceptable to mistreat people you perceived as beneath you." Tyler nodded, feeling ashamed. "I was angry about my own situation, and I took it out on people who didn't deserve it." "What situation?" Robert asked. Tyler explained about his mother's medical bills, his dropped college courses, and his financial stress. "I was jealous of the customers who could spend money without worrying about it. I guess I was looking for someone to blame." Robert listened carefully. "Tyler, I'm going to offer you something, but I want you to understand that it's not charity. It's an opportunity to prove that you've learned from your mistakes. Tyler looked up, confused. I run a foundation that helps young people pay for college while they work in community service, Robert continued. We need someone to coordinate our meal programs for homeless shelters and food banks. The pay isn't great, but it would cover your basic expenses and allow you to finish your education. Tyler stared at him in shock. You want to help me? After what I did to you? I want to give you a chance to help others, Robert corrected. If you take this job, you'll be working directly with people who are struggling, people who are often judged and mistreated because of their appearance or circumstances. Tyler felt tears forming in his eyes. Why would you do this for me? Robert stood up and walked to the window. Because everyone deserves a second chance. Because shame and unemployment won't teach you empathy. But working with people who face discrimination every day might. Tyler accepted the offer. And over the following months, he threw himself into the work with dedication he'd never shown before. He organized meal deliveries to homeless shelters, coordinated food drives for families in need, and worked directly with people who faced the kind of judgment he'd shown the Thompsons. At the food bank, he met families who had lost their homes, elderly people living on fixed incomes, and working parents who couldn't afford to feed their children despite having jobs. Many of them had been treated poorly by others who made assumptions about their circumstances. People look at us like we're lazy or worthless, one woman told him while picking up groceries for her family. They don't know that I work 2 jobs and still can't make ends meet. Tyler began to understand how his behavior at Romano's was part of a larger pattern of discrimination that affected vulnerable people every day. He realized that the Thompsons had experienced just a fraction of what many people faced regularly. 6 months after starting his new job, Tyler received a letter from a college student whose scholarship had been funded by the Thompson Foundation. The student wrote about how the scholarship had changed her life and allowed her to become the first person in her family to attend college. Tyler realized that his work was helping to create opportunities for people who might otherwise be overlooked or dismissed, just as he had dismissed the Thompsons. He was learning that real respect meant treating everyone with dignity, regardless of their appearance, circumstances, or ability to benefit him. The incident at Romano's had cost Tyler his job and his reputation, but it had also taught him lessons about empathy, respect, and human dignity that he would carry for the rest of his life. He learned that character isn't revealed by how we treat people who can help us, but by how we treat people we think cannot. And perhaps most importantly, he learned that everyone has a story, everyone has value, and everyone deserves to be treated with basic human respect, regardless of what they're wearing or what assumptions others might make about them.